Thanks for joining us. Another one of our planning and wealth management topic webinars. And we're very excited to have Cozy Wittman of College Inside Track with us today, talking with us about what is absolutely one of our, over my whole career, this has been one of the number one conversations we've had. It's right there with retiring and paying for kids or helping pay for grandkids college. And we spend a lot of time on our side crunching the numbers, figuring out how do we fund this, what are we aiming for? Is it public school or private school? Is it 100% or 50% and all those types of things? And how does that impact a family's financial plan? What type of impact might that have on their retirement plan or their long-term other goals and where it fits in the priority? And we spend a lot of time talking about the tax techniques, 529 plans versus education IRAs, and these different methodologies have come and gone. We just finished a big project evaluating 529 plans across the board to kind of revisit that and decide, where we were going to suggest clients save dollars. Spend a lot of time talking about the investments, but Cozy has a different expertise. I'd say very related and overlapping, but really a different specialty. And she's really, I've seen you speak several times, Cozy, and always a really interesting and dynamic speaker, and a lot more about the decision process, choosing schools, building a student's resume, the price in terms of, is the sticker really the sticker or is there something else there? And so I think we got a lot to talk about, and I'll try not to get in your way too much, but I do have some questions I wanted to run by, but maybe just a few housekeeping things. We are definitely open to questions, but to make sure we maximize Cozy's time and get the best out. Please type them in, and I'll try and fit them in as they may flow in the conversation here, or we'll get to them at the end. Just a note, our compliance team wants to make sure I acknowledge that none of this is intended to be individual investment and tax advice, financial planning recommendations. Seek your own individual consultation. Give us a call, basically. And also that, there is no financial relationship between Cozy's firm, College Inside Track, and ours. We are independent. We're doing this basically as a mutual sharing meeting of the minds here. So, and definitely want to thank our team at Cahill, Anna, Kevin, everyone for helping put this together, and certainly Cozy for your time here. So
thanks for having me, Scott.
Yeah. So maybe just to start it off, can you tell us about the type of work you do and, working with families and students as they're preparing for this big decision?
Yeah, so College Inside Track, we've been around for 16 years now, and our goal is always the same with every family. We want to make sure that the students find schools that fit them best. And we would describe fit in kind of three key categories. The first is, does the school fit the students academically? That would be things like majors available, rigor level of the school, the opportunity to change their mind about a major, for instance, backgrounds of professors, those kinds of things. Social fit would be your next pillar. And social fit is really, how does the school speak to you as a student? And I always tell students, this is the fun one, right? This is the one where you're thinking about parts of the country, size of the school, the demographic mix of kids on that campus, meaning is this a very sport-driven campus where everybody goes to the football games on Saturday? Or is this more focused on faith-based? So they're all different kinds of fit for students around the country in the social space. And the last pillar that we work off of is making sure that the school can get numbers to what the family has anticipated paying for school. So when they work with you, Scott, the game plan is then once you know kind of what the game plan is for paying for school, then let's go find schools that can help you get there.
Yeah, I like that last one. We got to make sure numbers work.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why I'm trying to instill some discipline here. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, the challenge for families is that the schools lack transparency in that space. And so that's just what makes it challenging. And our third overarching goal is really to make sure that the family, we bring down the stress level a little bit. There is a lot of shoulds around college, and some of them are accurate and some of them are not. And so we just want to try and bring the stress level down, help every student know if you want to go to college, there is a college for you, right? There's a lot of, I think, misperception around hey, if I'm not the 4-point kid, I guess I'm not going to college. And it's just candidly not true.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, bringing the stress level down and maybe opening the lines of communication. I think you see it in both sides. Students feeling pressure from
Mhm.
parents. Uh, mom is an engineer, and I know she really would love it if I did that. You see on that side, and you know, I can't tell you how many times we've sat down with people, and there's parents I think feel this weight or this obligation that they need to just pay for college wherever their child decides they want to go.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think there can be a lot of value. I'm not saying there isn't in expensive or higher price schools, but I think there should be a real conversation of those different types of elements you talked about, and what are we paying for here? The education, the experience, the social factor, and try and help parse those out. And there again, me being the mean guy saying sometimes, can you afford it? What's the reality here? What would be the impact on your other goals? Like, hey, being able to retire or paying off your house or other kids in the family.
For sure. It's such an important conversation. I actually had a conversation last night with a mom who was in tears on the other side of the phone because she let her daughter drive the search, and her
Mhm.
daughter applied to all these California schools. And now, right, they have all the packages. And the mom is realizing she's going to be required to co-sign on the vast majority of that debt. And they're looking at $44,000 a year of loans. And the daughter is planning to be a graphic design major, right?
Mhm.
And so when you look at a starting salary of $40,000 and debt around 160, $170,000, like those numbers just don't add up, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's so important that people have that candid discussion with you, to have a conversation around like, what's our long goals? Because you guys have their long game in mind. We're just thinking about this little tiny 4 years, right? So it's really hard. It's a very stressful time. The mom was in tears because she was thinking she's going to have to go back to her daughter and go, no, you can't go to the California schools. You got to go to one of the other ones that accepted you that are a lot less expensive.
Yeah, I think starting that early so there's no major disappointments. It'd be
That's right.
terrible feeling as a parent to have to come in and say, hey, we just can't afford this. And it could be even bigger stress. Like you say, the mom in tears, you just say, well, gee, I kind of let this get too far and all
Mhm.
her hopes and dreams, and she's really sold on this. So sure, I'll just sign off on it. And so, framing it up early on is great.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've heard you mention, Cozy, is concept of building scholarship package. I know you like to start working with students in high school, just sort of the sooner the better. Maybe can you talk a bit about that, so the timeline and what types of things you recommend as the years go by in terms of building that scholarship package, and or maybe funneling through this process of figuring out what's the right institution.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing that people need to understand is that the big scholarships, the scholarships that actually move the needle, come from the college themselves, right? The colleges are the single largest providers of scholarship dollars. Last year, our students garnered more than $30 million in scholarships from the colleges they applied to. So as you think about it that way, so as you shift your thinking from thinking you're going to be on the internet looking for scholarships and instead should spend your time really researching your schools, what that means is you can't start this in senior year, right? This has to start in sophomore and junior years. And the reason that's true is because the student is, in essence, building the scholarship package by the decisions they make in high school, and then also how you do your college search and how you represent yourself in the application and essay process. So during the high school timeline, I think it's important for people to remember that colleges are businesses. And so when they give away money, they give it away for business reasons. And the reasons colleges give away cash have to do with how they measure their own success. And so when you think about students and the decisions that they have in high school, one, can you meld in some rigor into your high school curriculum? Now, not every student is ready for AP classes sophomore year. Maybe they're ready in junior year, maybe they're not, maybe they aren't ready for that until senior year. But just taking a couple of AP classes, college in the schools, PSEO, something like that, just sprinkling some of those across the high school curriculum says to the college, here's somebody who started to challenge themselves and also started to learn like a college student learns. and starts to study like a college student studies. And why do they care about that? Well, those kids do tend to be a little bit more successful freshmen. So that's why they care. They don't want the kids who are going to like end up on academic probation at the end of first semester, right? They're looking for the kids who already kind of have that under their belt. The other thing to think about is find opportunities in high school to start to parse through some things you might sort of kind of be interested in doing for a living. So if your high school offers classes that allow you to explore some of that, you should take those opportunities while you're in high school. And the reason the college is like that is here's a kid who has at least demonstrated some desire to understand what they want. And even if they don't already want it, they've got some guideposts to work off of. Those kids tend to get in and out sooner than the kids who haven't done any of that during their high school time frame. That can also be done through things like volunteering, their activities they choose, those kinds of things.
So this idea of, thinking about what you want to study, how many, I've heard statistics over the years, like, I mean, average student changes their major 6 times or something like that. Do you have any update for us? Like, how often is it that a student knows what they want to study and sticks with it?
Yeah, next to never.
Next to never, okay.
It's the average student, about 80% of kids who go off to college change their major. So the vast majority of kids who sit in front of me and say, I'm definitely going to be an engineer, get into that first engineering class and go, well, I hate this, right? This is not what I thought it was going to be. The average change is about 2.5 times. So somewhere between 2 and 3 majors, the average student goes through. So that's where there are a lot of ways that people can really help their students. But the other thing that I always want, like, we have to be really careful. The way that, hey, what do you want to do is always posed to high school students is, hey, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? I just had this conversation this morning. And the student looked so relieved when I said to them, like, look, you're really only choosing a major for maybe the first 3 to 5 years of your career. And after that, you'll develop new skill sets you didn't even know you had. People will see talent in you and pull you in other directions. So don't feel like you're making this choice for the next 40 years of your life. You're really only making it for a very short time frame in most cases. So giving students some leeway and then looking at schools that have lots of options in their academic strengths, right? If I'm a super, super, super strong math science person and I don't have a great English brain, those classes are really hard for me, I'm probably not going to choose journalism as an option, right? So making sure there are lots of opportunities in the academic strengths is an important part of helping students kind of explore what that does look like.
I've read several books on this subject and it comes up all the time. And I'm forgetting the name. One of my partners at Cahill, I know, mentioned a couple of years ago reading a book really in defense of the liberal arts degree. And we talked about some of these concepts that basically, if you go, say, 10 years out or something, 15 years out, it really levelizes. And maybe to your point of taking some of the burden off of and maybe the value of not zeroing in on a more technical type major and getting something a little more broad. I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's no question. The parents don't like to hear this, but the number 2 top earning degree in the country is philosophy. So I think it's really important. Lots of parents are really focused. I understand it as a mom of 5, right? I get it. Like, you want your student to graduate and fly. You don't want them living in your basement. But at the end of the day, that really has more to do with who the student is and what they're willing to do to go find a job, right? Go find how they can take what they know and apply it in the job market. That has more to do with the student and the support they get. And so if parents are really worried about that, then part of that academic pillar is asking questions like, how do kids find internships on your campus? What is the average number of degrees a student has on your campus, right? How do you handle the change of major on your campus? Who comes and recruits out of the programs on your campus? So getting a better understanding of, what is the college geared for? People presume that biology looks the same on this school, this school, this school, and this school, and they don't. Some of them are very much geared toward helping students launch into a career, and others are really geared at having you go off and get a master's in biology or a PhD in biology. And so I think it's important for people to take this beyond kind of that surface level, which is kind of how we think about it, and deep dive into the areas around kind of what the student is interested in thinking about. And what does that look like on this campus? Do I get access to research? If so, when? So really diving more deeply really helps that theory. And also, making sure the student understands that there are resources on campus that can help them with those things. Lots of students go through their 4 years and don't even know there's a career resource center on campus. So really working with students to help them understand how the college could help them launch is an important part of that, I think.
I'm curious on the topic of sort of building the scholarship package, in high school. What is the role? What have you seen really in terms of things like a job, sports, volunteering? Are there any golden tips you have for us in terms of things that really make a difference? I've heard some criticism of affluent kids going on the volunteer trip to Africa, and everyone knows it's sort of a paid vacation experience, and what are you really doing? I'm not saying that. I'm saying I've seen that skepticism, and on the flip side, because I have some connection, I've heard that at the military academies, if you're an Eagle Scout, boom, that's a very high ranking in terms of sort of getting your application closer to the top. Any thoughts on those types of things?
Yeah, the way that we always think about this is, what are the things you can do in high school that really demonstrate the person that you are, right? And so when it comes to activities or things that you're doing, more is not better. Deeper is better. So taking things that you care about and going deeper with them is better. So if you're a Boy Scout, going deeper into that Eagle Scout phase, right? And thinking about the project and those kinds of things, smart. If you are thinking about healthcare, getting opportunities to volunteer in healthcare areas, right? If you're thinking about engineering, are there camps that you can go to that could get you aligned better with the engineering space and what kind of degrees you might be interested in? Those kind of sponsored by the colleges camps, if you will, while if they have value to the student, I would take them up on it. Just know it is not going to get you any closer to Harvard by attending that summer camp that they held, last summer. There's a huge misunderstanding. Of course, the colleges want you to think about it that way because it boosts their camp attendance. But I think any choice that you make during your high school time frame that is reflective of the person and the student that you are just smart choices.
Any thoughts in particular on youth sports? We were just talking about that, leading up to the call here. We both have volleyball connection and background, and it's amazing to me the amount of time and money and energy that families put into youth sports these days, and yet here I am wrapped right up in the middle of it. And do you have any thoughts on how many kids really get scholarships? Does that play a role, or is that more really on the athletic side than academic side?
Yes. So it's super important for families who have student athletes to understand that the vast majority of those kids are not going to get enough money to make a difference in the overarching cost of college. The other thing that I want to make sure that parents see, and we saw this in our own family, we had a D1 volleyball athlete, but a lot of her peers ended up walking away from their scholarships because ultimately the school didn't fit. They sat on the bench and the school didn't fit, so they didn't stay. It was further from home than they were anticipating, and so they came home. No one in their family was watching them play because they were far away, and so they came home. So I think it's really important when we work with student athletes at College Inside Track, our job is to help them really balance. Yes, you can play your sport at these schools, but can the schools still meet your academic goals, your social goals, and those financial goals. One of the things that student athletes often find is that they are earning less as a student athlete than if they would just go and work, right? If you added up all the hours that they're spending training and playing and traveling, and the money that they get to do it, it just doesn't make a notable difference for the vast majority of athletes. That having been said, I love the idea that people get to play their sport during college. And so really think deeply about things like, would I rather be playing or would I rather be aligned with a school that has a lot of name recognition, but I'm sitting on the bench all the time? So there's so many places to take that kind of student athlete thing. It's a great thing. At the same time, if someone decides not to play their sport, or a kid just isn't sport oriented, that's okay. There are a million other things that can help you elevate above.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, speaking from my personal experience, I was lucky enough to get a bit of a scholarship, at least what was available for men's volleyball. It was an incredibly formative experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Lifelong friends and memories, but it was sports, 1, 2, 3, academics number 4. And in terms of the comparison versus a job, I mean, I was telling this with my wife. I mean, it's not just the hours of practice, but it's the always being injured, always in the training room, weightlifting, being physically and emotionally exhausted at the end of every day. And then you're supposed to go study, at 8 when you're just completely drained every single day. The NCAA limits on when you practiced and the number of days meant nothing. It was every single day, every chance we got. And so it was great. But, I look at a lot of my friends, my brothers both played as club sport athletes, and I look at them like they had a great experience. They made lifelong friends. They played at a very high level. They had that camaraderie, they had the competition, they're still in connection with their crew, but they practice like 2 days a week and they go to a tournament once or twice a month, and the time commitment was just so much less, and I think it allowed a lot more room for real serious study, and not a bad experience either. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You really need to think seriously about what you want. So
100% true. And I think the challenge is, when you're a high school student and you have coaches talking to you, it's really hard to pull the stars out of your eyes, right? And try and look at this more logically.
Yeah, exactly. So one of my favorite topics, and I love the way you had framed this before, Cozy, is this idea of, we've talked about this feeling that, there's 30 great schools and everything else is garbage. And I mean, so is it true if your child does not get into an elite prestigious institution, they're going to be a complete failure in life?
Yeah, well, if that was true, all my kids are doomed for failure. But the reality is on the planet that in the US, there are just under 3,000 schools. The vast majority of those schools, the vast majority are great schools. And so the question is really not, again, where did you go? Because most employers care much less about that. They care very much what you did with your experience there. And so, you could have a kid who goes to Dartmouth and wastes away 4 years versus that kid who goes to the University of Minnesota, busts their butt, takes advantage of all the internships and ends up at JP Morgan Chase in their finance department. It's really about the experience the student chooses. And the other thing that I think people are not prepared for all the time on those campuses is if your student gets in, and we can talk about this last year's application cycle because the numbers are depressing, candidly. But if your student gets in, there is a very different campus environment in those top 30 schools, right? It is not this life is so fun environment, right? It is very much competitive, academically driven environment on most of those campuses. And most kids are thinking about college more like they saw on the movie last week they were watching. And that's where that social fit piece kind of plugs in. It's important for people really to think about what's the experience that will help my student be most successful. And candidly, they can get that experience on a lot of different campuses around the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this has been interesting for me to follow over the years, going back to the late 90s as financial planner with a firm, and we kind of looked at this, and so dug around with what I could at that time, and did some research and brought it back to our planning committee. And a very interesting academic piece that basically screened and said, yeah, sure, you look at the list of top schools, you see higher average salaries, starting and on out. But if you screen that and say, well, here's a student who was accepted to Harvard but chose to go to Minnesota, and you levelize it in terms of aptitude and maybe what they were doing to get those high test scores and grades, they ended up in the same place 10 years out. Now I've seen many different versions of this since then. I'll tell you, just anecdotally, see the pants, we've worked with many affluent households, high net worth people. So if you're looking at it from a return on investment standpoint, obviously there's a lot more to it. Money's not everything, but I think that is something that comes into play with a lot of this. I'll tell you, we look through the households we work with, it's all over the board. Yeah, there's prestige degrees, there's state schools, there's all kinds of paths, including, no college for probably one of our wealthiest families. And so there is a lot there. There's one of the more recent pieces that I've really been referring to people is Is College Worth It? A Comprehensive Return on Investment Analysis by the Foundation of Research on Equal Opportunity, a guy named Preston Cooper. And if you look that up, it is lengthy, but it reminds me of another headline I saw that, how you go to college is more important than where you go to college. So the degree choice underlying and the students are going to have a much bigger impact than, just the brand label. But for anyone who's at this point, and presumably most people listening to this are, I really encourage you to go and look at that. It's an extensive piece, but they have breakdown by majors, breakdown by schools. And, one of the things I grabbed a quote here. It's differences in return on investment in programs can amount to millions of dollars. The best program in the nation anywhere is computer science major at Caltech. Students in this program expect an ROI of over 4.4 million, but 28% of programs have a negative return on investment, meaning students will be financially worse off by having participated in those programs. It goes on to list some of these really elite, prestigious schools. Harvard University, students who major in ethnic and gender studies can expect a negative return on investment of $47,000. Not to say it's not a worthwhile program or might be rewarding and fulfilling and all kinds of reasons to study something like that, but keep in mind you might not be getting what you pay for. Film and arts program at University of Pennsylvania, return on investment of negative $140,000. 17 programs at NYU have a negative ROI. The worst among them, music, leaving students over $500,000 in the hole. So a lot to it other than just the headline of which school and what the average starting salary is.
That's right. And at the end of the day, what I really want people to understand is what's the best place for my student to go where they can be successful? Because I get a lot of students who want to go off to these big universities. And when we do our meeting together, they can barely lift their eyes off the table and actually have a conversation with me. And consequently, when you think about that student going off to, say, University of Michigan, those kind of schools, you have to be the look at me kid to get to take advantage of the opportunities that sit on those campuses. And so if you're not that knock on the door, hi, professor, it's me. Hi, it's me again. I was here last week. Hi, it's me again. If you're not that kid, you would be so much better off at a mid-size or a smaller school where you just more holistically get to know your professors, right? College is not really about where you go. It's about what you do with your time there. And so really thinking about the opportunity. And here's the other thing. You could be at a genetics program at this, and I'm just going to make this up, at Santa Clara University.
Yeah.
And it could be one of the best genetic programs in the country. But half the people on tonight, or probably more even, I've never heard of Santa Clara University, right? So that's where you just have to be, you have to dive deeper. You have to dive deeper. You can't just hang on the surface anymore, especially if you're thinking about that ROI piece. And money notwithstanding, what I think is most important is that where will your student be successful piece.
Mhm.
because you could send them off to one of those schools in the top 30. But man, if they are already anxiety ridden, right, if that's something that just is part of who they are as a person, you send them off to those schools, they are going to be back at your house faster than you know what. So I think it's really important for people to just think harder about this decision.
Mhm. Something I've wondered about and talked through with folks is you bring a couple thoughts to mind, but it seems like there's so much focus on the bachelor's degree, probably rightly so. But I mean, what are your thoughts if you had a family in front of you, willing to write huge checks or, financially underwrite a very expensive private school, with no types of aid versus maybe a more modest state school and leave some in the bank to help support that next step? I mean, is it a bigger differentiator to have money left over for a specialized master's degree or maybe, law degree, MBA, medical school, something like that versus kind of stretching to do everything? Because we hear that a lot, our students very smart, very gifted, they've done, and so you think, well, a lot of those types of kids, they may want to do more. And I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that two things really. The first is um, I like to kind of elevate out of the public versus private space because it's a little bit of a misnomer. I like to think about it more as flexibly priced and inflexibly priced.
uh, uh,
And so, what I would rather people do is figure out what their number is. What do they think they should or could pay for an undergrad degree? And then, if they are able to surpass that, whatever that number is, awesome. If you want to help your student at that next step, great, because a lot of degrees today do require that next step.
mhm.
The other thing, though, that I think is really important, and I've just come to learn as you talk to families, people think about college like they think about cars. So, any car you buy is going to get you from A to B. But some people really, really need the Porsche, right? And other people are just fine with the Chevy Malibu.
Mhm.
And so I think there's more to college than its ROI back to the student. And I think people think about it differently. Where I think it gets troublesome is where the people think they need the Porsche, but they can't afford the Porsche. And so they think, well, we'll just take out loans for the Porsche. And that's where I think it starts to become a problem. And that's where I think it's important for people to know, like, hey, by the way, Drake University down in Des Moines, 77% of those kids get substantial and enough aid that it costs the same as the University of Minnesota.
Mhm.
And that's where you have to that's kind of where we come in, where that understanding the landscape better, right? It's not as cut and dry as, publics are cheap, privates are expensive. Because, if you're a Minnesota resident, for instance, and you want to go to University of Michigan, it's going to be 68 grand a year.
Mhm.
That's the same. It's actually more expensive than St. Thomas at full price. And St. Thomas isn't going to charge you full price. So that's where the complexities start to come in, and it's really much harder for people to kind of sort through that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And so flexible versus inflexible. I like that. So we often hear, an offer came back from, one of the local private schools. This is what they offered. This is great. What about next step there? I mean, is there actually room for negotiation? I think this is kind of a fun topic. I mean, and what are your thoughts or advice there? Is the price tag the price tag, or is there some
Yeah,
room to
yeah.
work with them?
So the price tag is sometimes the price tag and sometimes it's not. A couple of things that we think about. So what you're talking about, Scott, of course, is the appeal process where you get to, don't call it this when you talk to schools, but negotiate with them because they don't like
Appeal.
uh,
Yes. There.
yeah. But
Negotiating would be distasteful. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So your appeal has to have something behind it. So talking with a good friend of mine, they've had significant income issues since COVID started. And her income last year went down significantly. So it's different than the first year of their FAFSA. So this could happen within a student's senior year. So you fill out your FAFSA and 2 months later, mom or dad loses their job. Well, now you have a differential, right? They saw one income. You actually have a working different income this year. And so that's an opportunity to appeal. Now, the college is under no obligation to accept that appeal. But at the end of the day, you can go back to them and say, here's our documentation, I'm not making as much, and that can be something that you appeal. The more fun appeals are the ones where you do a comparison of, hey, and I'll just use a couple of local universities in the Twin Cities. So you really want to go to St. Thomas. If we work with families, what we do is automatically include St. John's, right? Even if you saw St. John's, you don't like St. John's, we want you still to pat that admissions group on the head, feed them lots of sunflower seeds. We want St. John's to think that you are in love with them as much as you love St. Thomas, because at the end of the day, if St. John's comes back with a stronger financial package, that can be leveraged then at St. Thomas to say, look, we really want to come here. Look what St. John's did though, right? And you will often find St. Thomas willing to bring their price down, maybe not to St. John's, but bring it down to some. So you have squeezed a little bit more money out of them. Where it never works is the public institutions. They are not interested in your appeal. It also never works at highly selective schools. So schools that have kind of an acceptance rate under the 20% mark, those schools' philosophy is basically like, you're so lucky to have us, right? So they don't see any reason to appeal because candidly, if you don't want to pay my $78,000 price tag, I've got 140,000 other kids to choose from. So that's kind of how to think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've spent all my life in kind of the upper Midwest, but one of the things that kind of strikes me is even just being a couple states away in Indiana, I don't feel like regional private schools are known nearly as much as their alumni or the students would like to think they are, just just 300 miles away, or certainly not 1,000 miles away. You have any way of measuring that impact? I mean, I don't hear anyone in Minnesota talking about Wabash College in Indiana, which was a very highly regarded private engineering school. And
yeah, for sure. I think that's where the regionalization of colleges, that's where that kind of deeper dive into who does care about Wabash. And so, as you're thinking about schools, like lots of kids, when I sit down and chat with them, they want to go far. They don't know where exactly, but not here. Wherever here is. The kids in Hawaii don't want to stay in Hawaii, right? They want to come to the mainland. And so, but the parents often like very worried about this exact idea. And the question I always want them to be asking is, well, talk to the school and see who comes and recruits, because the companies that recruit out of Wabash might be from the East Coast. They might be from the Southern United States. Corporations have schools that they do traditionally recruit out of. And that's way more important than whether the parents have heard about it. Right. So, and that's where I often say to kids, as you're thinking about parts of the country you want to go to school in, you might want to think about, do you also want to launch in that part of the country? Or is the game plan to come back to the Twin Cities? And if that's the case, then you have to start building a network in the Twin Cities. You need to do some internships here. It's likely going to mean that, if you're going to school in Oregon, that you build your own network here, find your own internships, because that school in Oregon probably can't help you find an internship back in the Twin Cities if that's your long game. And that's where more planning is helpful, I would say.
Yeah, interesting. So kind of a extreme step, but I know of one family that successfully did this, actually the family relocating to get in-state tuition. And we're in a bit of a different time here. We're having a Zoom meeting, a lot more people are working remotely, but in that case, it was an only child, and parents had some flexibility work-wise, and they relocated to the East Coast and lived there and established residency. First of all, is it viable? Are students able to do this on their own? For instance, moving somewhere, taking a gap year, moving to Georgia and working there, and getting an apartment, getting a driver's license, all that type of thing. Does that work? And any thoughts on families themselves moving?
Yeah, I would say the first thing you want to do is just double check that stuff will actually work at the school that you are interested in, because it's school specific. A couple of years ago, I had a current student, she was in college, reach out to me and just ask about trying to get in-state tuition so she had gone to, and I don't remember which was which, but she had gone to University of Florida and then transferred to Florida State, or vice versa, I can't remember. And at University of Florida, the first school she was at, they gave her residency. And then when she changed, the other school had a different policy and they had no interest in giving her in-state tuition. And when you looked at their residency requirements, they were in essence the same requirements for being an independent on the FAFSA, meaning almost no students are ever going to qualify for that. So I think it's really important before people go like drastic measures to understand like what's actually required. So in the state of California, you have to live in that state and have paid taxes in that state for 2 full years before you can even consider residency. So, you know, moving freshman year means maybe ultimately later you could get residency, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. And so, and there are some schools that make it super easy. In the state of Missouri, you just have to have proven that you've lived in the state for a year, meaning you did not go home for summer, student, right? You had to be in the state consistently for a year, like holidays excluded kind of thing. But you also needed to be a registered voter. If you had a car, that had to be registered there. You had to have a driver's license. You also had to have earned $7,000 and paid taxes on that $7,000 in their state. But if you've done all those things, blammo, you are a resident of the state for the University of Missouri system. So there are other states, I can't remember if it's Wyoming or Montana, one of those two, you pay out-of-state tuition for a year and then they auto-convert every kid. So that's where I like this like flexibly priced and inflexibly priced thought process, because those little spot programs at the state schools are all over the country, but they're harder to find. But it does make them flexible.
Very interesting. So maybe become a big picture topic. One thing I should ask you earlier on, what about merit versus needs-based money? What do we need to know just from a very high level there? It's such an important topic.
It is. So in the merit and needs space, these are 2 separate buckets at college land. And not every college has both buckets. Some schools only have a need-based bucket. So many times I meet with families who has a super Sharpie kid. They're thinking about the schools where super Sharpie kids might go. And when I ask them their financial strategy for paying for school, they always mention scholarship dollars. And there lies the rub, because the top schools in the country, if they have acceptance rates under 15%, there's no scholarship dollars for being smart. They don't exist there, because again, those schools' philosophy is, you're so lucky to have us, right? Those schools give away need-based money. So everybody knows their neighbor's cousin's daughter got a full ride at Harvard. No, she didn't. First of all, no, she didn't. Second, she did not get it for being smart, because Harvard does not give away that money. They do give away need-based money. And because their sticker price is so high, lots of families qualify for need at those schools. So that's where there's a lot of confusion. But the girl is smart, or she couldn't have gotten into Harvard, and parents just assume they got the money because she's smart. Because Harvard, a long time ago, stopped calling that need-based money grants. They also call them scholarships.
I see.
So it can be very confusing. So need-based money based on the output of your FAFSA. You fill out your FAFSA, you get a number that's now today referred to as the student aid index. The student aid index is used by the colleges to determine if you have need on their campus. So you could find yourself need-based at St. Thomas and not need-based at the University of Minnesota. So need 100% determined by the output of the FAFSA. Merit, on the other hand, 100% determined by how much or how interested the school is in the student based on decisions they made during their high school timeframe and how they represented themselves through the search and application process.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So you'll hear quite often people talk about, to help manage the cost, doing college credits in high school, community college, junior college, do your first 2 years at lower price school, then transfer. What can you tell us about that as a strategy?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And it used to be pretty straightforward. Now it's a little bit more complex. So the credits that kids get in high school through college in the schools, PSEO or AP or IB classes, or any dual credit that the school offers, those may or may not be accepted for credit. So this concept that kids can get their associate's degree in high school is in most cases false, right? The schools will accept some of those credits, but they won't accept them all. Now, there are rare exceptions to that, like in the state of Minnesota. There is an agreement amongst the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, or the MNSCU system, that any credits that kids get through PSEO, through schools that belong to that grouping, will be accepted. And so if they do get a full load that would get them their associates, and they decide to, like if you do that at Normandale and you decide to go to Mankato, those will be accepted, and you do advance yourself by 2 years. But if you want to go to the University of Minnesota, who does not participate in this system, you may or may not get all those credits accepted. And in most cases, the answer is not all of them get accepted.
And if you think you want to go to Normandale and then transfer to Boulder to ski and have a cool degree your last 2 years,
same thing.
Yeah.
Right. But here's the distinction. When you get those credits in high school, you start college as a freshman, they apply those credits, and blammo, now you're a junior. When you start at Normandale and you've already graduated high school, so you're starting now as a freshman in essence at Normandale, and you decide to go to Boulder, you are now a transfer student. And in that transfer student process, the student ends up losing out on the top merit scholarships available, because the college can no longer count that student as part of their 4-year potential graduates. And because you're not going to help them with their 4-year graduate numbers, they don't care so much about you, right? So
interesting.
That's where, when we work with families, we want to lay the landscape out so that in spring of senior year, kids can make their top choice. But for families to think about this, if your student has any inkling at all about going to a 4-year school and they think that's going to be on the docket, do a full-fledged college search. In spring of senior year, they can make that decision then, because the community colleges don't need you to have done tours, and they don't need you to have interacted with them, and they don't need usually an essay, and they don't, the application process is a lot simpler. The timeline is a lot shorter. And that decision could be made very late in the process if ultimately that's what the family thinks the right goal is.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So parents might jump towards, oh, I like this idea, I've heard about this, go to community college and then transfer, but that transfer could really close the door potentially on a lot of money that might make that's really good to know.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that I want families to understand is there are a lot of colleges that would financially make it worth your while to just start and finish there.
Yeah.
And they will find themselves in the same space as the local university that you were planning to attend.
Because that's a huge metric for them, right?
Giant.
Graduation rate. Yep. Completion.
Giant. Yeah. Absolutely. And there are very good gifters in the country. They just aren't the big brands that people have heard of, because those big brands don't have to give away a ton of cash.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
And I think it's really important. Don't think of those schools as less than just because you haven't heard about them, right? Because they're not. Wabash is a great example. I would venture to say if people here are mostly from Minnesota on the webinar today, they've never heard of Wabash.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, a lot of our favorite private schools right around here, a lot of people in Indianapolis haven't heard of those.
That's right.
Or maybe just vaguely in passing. And yeah. So I think it was Financial Planning Magazine just recently had an article about the gap year as a potential major tool helping with college funding crisis. another year for your investments to hopefully grow, maybe a year of
Especially
earning.
now.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think about that? Does that impact, I mean, are they just looking at kids coming right out of high school? Is there any issue with potential aid or scholarships in those minds if someone does take a gap year?
Yeah, the gap year, so from the college's perspective, they don't have any issues, right, with kids taking gap year. The the primary thing the colleges are interested in is what are you planning to do during your gap year? And if the answer is, well, I'm going to earn money so that I can pay for college, awesome, right? They're good with that. If the answer is, I'm going to spend, 6 months doing mission work in South America, great. If the answer is, well, I'm going to sit on my parents' couch and play video games all year, they're not so interested in those gap year kids. So have a game plan to fill the gap year with. And it could be like we're just trying to get our earnings back from this, terrible stock market year. But
Yeah.
at the same time, your student has to have something going on. The one thing I would not do in a gap year is take classes. Because again, then you're a transfer student, right? And you're going to lose out on those freshman larger merit packages. The social pieces around gap year are kind of interesting, I think, and it's important to think about. A lot of gap year students are challenged to catch up with their peers on campus. So it's important to think about that. What does the gap year look like? Students fall out of the study habits that they had in high school with that gap year potentially. And so if you're going to do a gap year, thinking about how am I going to support my student once they do go off to college, making them aware of tutoring services, letting them know like, hey, raise your hand and say you need help before you're drowning, before you hit the F. Giving some academic support to that student who's taken a gap year is often really important.
Great. Well, we have a little bit of time left. Anything you want to tell us about College Inside Track specifically and kind of the process that you go through and how that works with students?
Sure. So when we work with families, they get assigned to a member of our team. Today, we have a team of 13 consultants. And the consultant that works with the family then is responsible. I always tell them they're like a Sherpa, right? If you're going to go up and go to International Falls and Boundary Waters for the first time, I've never camped up there. I would need a guide. So think about us like that. So the consultant is there to really guide what you should be doing, when you should be doing it, and how you should be doing it. They are also a sounding board for the students who are like, hey, my best friend's applying to USC. I think I would like to apply to USC too. Great, let's take a look at the school and let's see if it aligns with the goals that we've laid down, right? But they are really there to help students understand things like high school course selection, testing strategy when it comes to the tests, how to think about their activities, how to start to pull those together in a college resume. So when we do finally get to applications, it's much easier to get it into the application. We work with the students on their list. Obviously, we build it and then we teach the student how to deconstruct it, how to kick schools off. We do the really practical physical work of helping the student understand what to write on their essays, as well as the editing of those essays to make sure that the student has really represented themselves well in that space, as well as the applications. That's all individualized support. Pacing, prioritizing what to be doing, when to do it. It would include work with any of the financial aid forms that the colleges ask the family to fill out. And then as you get into decision support in the second half of the senior year, really helping students understand now you've been accepted to 7 schools. How do you do an apples to apples to apples comparison of these schools? How are you going to go deeper? And that's where you might get into things like internship opportunities, who comes and recruits out of the school, those kinds of things. And then ultimately, once the student makes a decision, we do sit on a more reactive bench, if you will, ready to jump to action when the family has an issue once their kid's in school. We do sit around and hang with the family through the student's undergrad timeframe.
Great. how does, I don't know if you want to share in this format, but I mean, what is the pricing structure? How does that work?
So we're a flat rate service. We charge one fee. It covers all the work that we do for as long as we hang with the student. We have a few different packages though. And so I actually would recommend if families are interested in learning more about how we work, or they just want a better launch to their own college search, they can certainly set up a free consultation with me. I sit down every day of my life and chat college with people. I love it.
Yeah,
I was talking to somebody this morning at the club about it. It is my favorite thing to do. And so if people want to set up a family consultation, I'm certainly happy to do that.
that's great. So I see a question here, and we're open to some other ones. It says they'd like to hear Cozy's thoughts on what was depressing about the application or enrollment numbers. That came up earlier. I guess you referenced that you're discouraged by them. What was going on there?
Yeah, so the application trends from last year were pretty interesting. And like I said, a little bit depressing for the average middle class family is what I would say. So one of the things that we saw were the more selective schools became even more selective. The sad part was the tier 2 schools. So these would be schools like Northeastern, Boston College. Those middle tier schools cut their acceptance rates in essence in half. So if last year they had a 30% acceptance rate, they are now down at 15%, which not only means it's harder to get in, it also means that your student is very likely not getting very good aid from colleges that used to give some. The other thing we saw was the huge discrepancy between the application dates. So a number of the tier 2 and tier 1 schools are now taking as many as almost 60% of their freshman classes out of early decision, leaving regular decision, which would be for most schools like a January, February, March deadline for the applications, under 20%. And then the remainder sit in the early action space. So today more than ever, if you can afford to pay full price for school, you should choose at least one school early decision. If you cannot, and we didn't sit in that space. I couldn't send my kids off to a 60 grand school and expect to pay 60 grand. And so consequently, take advantage of early action and be on top of your deadlines because it will matter significantly around acceptance.
Very good. Very good. Interesting. Well, this has been fascinating. So we've recorded this. If anyone listening, knows of anyone else who could benefit, just let us know. We can give them a recording. I think obviously great. Like Cozy said, she's available to talk about the strategy and the decision process and just incredible wealth of knowledge. We, of course, can help, I think, answer the question about can you afford it and how to crunch the numbers there. One thing that kind of came to mind is I was listening to talk thinking, having this been a big part of my day-to-day life for a long time, you're certainly one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met in this field. I thought, I don't know where Cozy went to college, but you're a Cyclone. I just reached over and looked at my app on LinkedIn. So yeah. I think that's kind of brings it full circle for me. You're at the top of the game here. And did you enjoy your experience at Iowa State?
Yeah, very much. I always joke to people that I chose Iowa State because my parents had season football tickets. My dad was a pharmaceutical rep. He sold to veterinarians. And, he knew a bunch of people at Iowa State. And I was like, great, it's 20 minutes from my house. I'll go there. Nope. Right. Nope. It wasn't a really conscious decision. But that having been said, it was a great experience. Looking back on it, though, given what I know today, I think I personally would have benefited from a little bit smaller school than Iowa State. I was at that time a much quieter person, pretty shy even. And so, when I'd walk into the classes of 300 kids in my kinesiology class, I left knowing not a soul. So I would say I would have made different choices probably.
Very good. Very good.
Well, Scott, if you don't mind, I'm going to just drop a link in where people can reach me to set up the consultation. Is that okay?
Sure thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your time. This was wonderful. And maybe we'll be able to do one of these again before too long. So
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to. Thanks for having me.
thanks a lot, Cozy.
Yeah,
Bye.
you bet. Take care. Bye-bye.